Urgent, the war for Africa. Budanov versus Lavrov, a head-to-head clash on a new continent. Ukraine opens a global front and forcefully kicks Russia out. A deadly trap for the Kremlin from Budanov. On top of that, Kyiv's special forces have already set up military bases in Libya. And also, the end of Putin's exports. Ukrainian naval drones have seized control over the Mediterranean Sea and are torching Russian oil tankers. This is a global game. Kyiv is launching a large-scale strategy to capture African markets, leaving Lavrov with nothing. Welcome to the channel, Ukraine Today. How are our fighters breaking the Kremlin's empire on the other side of the world? Watch right now. My name is Andriy Silikov. Let's discuss how our country is becoming a global player. The gloomy horse of Russian diplomacy, Sergei Lavrov, is once again putting up a smokescreen. The other day, he proudly announced that Moscow is opening 4 more embassies in Africa to completely take over the entire continent. Naturally, the Kremlin hides behind fairy tales about friendship and fighting colonialism, but the reality is much dirtier. Putin's Russia only wants 2 resources from Africa: cheap minerals to patch the holes in its burning budget, and new people to fight against the Ukrainian army.
Previously, Moscow mainly used instruments of soft power, media, cultural projects, and educational programs, but now it is increasingly shifting to direct political influence by creating loyal parties. These political forces can become tools for advancing the geopolitical interests of the Russian Federation and influencing the domestic politics of African states.
Lavrov thought that Africa would become a quiet and profitable haven for them, but he was gravely mistaken. Ukraine enters the stage and the rules of the game are changing. The head of the president's office, Kirill Budanov, gathered key security officials and diplomats to approve a historic plan, the first global strategy to seize influence in Africa. Kyiv is stepping onto the world stage.
For the first time, Ukraine has set itself the goal of influencing the situation on the African continent and defending Ukrainian interests in this part of the world. Ukraine must reaffirm and strengthen its standing as a competitive and influential geopolitical player, actively defend its sovereign agency and independence around the world, and thus steadily advance its vital economic, security, and other strategic interests anywhere on the planet.
We are entering Africa not situationally, but seriously and for the long term. Ukrainian diplomats have already set their sights on the continent's most powerful and influential states. From the wealthy market of Nigeria to Ethiopia, where the headquarters of the African Union is located. For us, this is not just about prestige. These are gigantic markets for Ukrainian grain, new billion-dollar contracts, and most importantly, votes on international platforms. But diplomacy is only the tip of the iceberg, beneath which lies a real tough shadow war. French government journalists have revealed a truly sensational insider report. Ukraine has already established at least 2 fully operational military bases in Libya.
One is located near the American Command in Africa and a British intelligence center. The second is directly on the Mediterranean coast. The cooperation between Ukraine and Libya is quite official. Ukrainians are teaching Libyans how to operate drones in exchange for being allowed to conduct operations against Russia. If this is true, then it's a reason to be happy and proud.
Also, according to French intelligence, it was from our Libyan base that the legendary Magura sea drone was launched in March of this year.
RFI reports that from the Libyan coast, Ukrainians launched their Magura at a Russian gas tanker on March 4th and allegedly killed high-ranking Russian GRU officer Andrei Averyanov there, which has not been confirmed, but the vessel was disabled, which is certain.
This is an absolute breakthrough. Now Putin's oil ships carrying stolen resources can no longer feel safe even thousands of kilometers away from the Black Sea. Ukrainian drones have brought a key survival route of the Russian economy under fire control. With Ukraine's arrival, Africa is unlikely to become a lifeline for Moscow. Libya, torn apart by civil war, has for years been used by the Russians as a staging base for expansion on the continent. But now it seems the Kremlin will have to pack its bags because Kyiv will not back down from its goals.
Our hypothetical presence in Libya is a step towards stopping the Russian Federation in Africa, from where Moscow draws resources and mercenaries to continue the war against us. The Russians are trying to turn Libya, split by civil war, into their springboard base for Africa. Driving them out of there means cutting them off from this continent.
Meanwhile, the Russians are furious about our successes around the world. Kyiv continues to forcefully push the Kremlin out of the wealthy Gulf countries. Panicking over its loss of influence, Moscow has launched a pathetic fake news war, trying at least somehow to stop Ukraine's triumph. How is Ukraine breaking Putin's lies in the East and gaining new allies for itself? Watch right now.
Russia is trying to buy up Arab telegram channels to launch information attacks against Ukraine. According to the Center for Strategic Communications, owners of channels targeting an Arab audience are increasingly receiving offers to post anti-Ukrainian materials. In practice, this works as follows. Russian specialists create fake content and then pay for its placement on Arab telegram channels. In this way, disinformation is presented as if it were the supposedly independent opinion of the local audience.
A certain Ksenia, using the Konfatak account, is offering Arab bloggers to post videos on the topic of violations of agreements between Ukraine and Arab countries that are being targeted by Iranian Shaheds. She promises to provide the materials in a ready-to-use format. All that remains is to publish them and present them as news, from a publication by the Center for Strategic Communications iPravdi on Telegram.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine views such a disinformation campaign as an indirect admission by Moscow of its own failures in the region and the effectiveness of Ukrainian policy. Among the fake news being spread are claims about alleged losses of Ukrainian specialists who are helping Gulf countries defend themselves against Iranian airstrikes. The Russian side is also promoting the narrative that Kyiv is allegedly failing to fulfill its obligations to the countries of the region, the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs clarified.
Moscow is extremely dissatisfied with the rapid strengthening of Ukraine's ties with the Gulf countries amid Iranian aerial terror. They understand there that Ukraine's unique experience has radically changed its role in the region, which is why they have resorted to propaganda, trying to downplay Ukraine's contribution. They are spreading fake stories that Ukrainian specialists are dying or that Ukraine is not fulfilling its obligations and so on. In the coming weeks, we expect to see more such fabrications appear. This propaganda will not achieve its goal. Andriy Sybiha, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, on social network X.
Such information campaigns intensified after Kyiv's recent successes in the Middle East, namely the restoration of diplomatic relations with Syria and the expansion of cooperation in the fields of security and defense. Until recently, Damascus was considered one of Moscow's key allies in the region. However, after the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime, the balance of power is shifting, and according to experts, Ukraine may fill the newly vacated niche. As for the Gulf countries, which previously also maintained contacts with Russia, analysts note that their interest in Moscow has noticeably weakened, especially after attacks from Iran, a Kremlin ally.
After the collapse of the Soviet Union, a great deal was lost. Well, the Russian Federation, as a separate entity, was present there only to a certain extent. They were always playing a role there. It's important to understand that their influence existed, but it was limited to areas where the Arabs had a specific interest in cooperation.
Now Ukraine is expanding its cooperation with the Gulf states not only in the area of supplying interceptor drones. As Volodymyr Zelensky stated, Kyiv is also ready to join efforts to ensure the security of shipping and to unblock the Strait of Hormuz, which is being blocked by Iran. According to the Ukrainian leader, the situation in the region is in many ways reminiscent of the experience of launching the grain corridor, which continued to operate despite Russia's attempts to block maritime routes in the Black Sea. However, no official requests have yet been received from countries in the region addressed to Kyiv, so Ukraine is focusing on the agreements already reached with new partners, primarily in the area of joint arms production and strengthening defense cooperation.
Rustem Umerov is currently continuing his work in the region. Rustem Umerov is currently continuing to work in the region on our joint security initiatives with the relevant countries, as well as on expanding both defense and economic relations. We already have agreements with Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, and Jordan, and there is also interest from Oman and Bahrain. For the first time in history, Ukraine is not just represented in the Middle East and Persian Gulf region, but is a sought-after and strong partner there.
Let me remind you, Ukraine has already signed decade-long agreements with a number of countries in the region. These agreements provide for the establishment of joint production facilities on the territory of the signatory states, investments in the defense sector, and cooperation in the development and production of armaments. Nikita Skoblikov for Freedom TV channel.
Putin is furious, but he's losing control. Ordinary Russians are starting to wake up en masse. Seeing the rear ablaze, they no longer believe the Kremlin's pathetic tales and are now openly acknowledging Ukraine's complete air superiority. How is Putin's propaganda falling apart under the people's fiery questions? Watch right now.
Well, friends, it seems that in the 5th year of the full-scale war, the Vankas and Mankas across the border are slowly starting to wake up. And we're not saying this just because we want it to be true. It's just that in the last 2 or 3 months, the work of many Z propagandists and war correspondents has changed beyond recognition. And so that everyone understands what we're talking about, let's read together a recent post by the war correspondent named Kotonok. By the way, he's a serious writer in the Russian world.
Once again about the main developments at the front. The enemy has once again seized control of the small airspace over the Ukrainian theater of military operations. The enemy is expanding the so-called kill zone. There are plans to expand this notorious zone to 100 kilometers deep into our territory, and just a moment, not only in the LDNR, but also deep into the regions of mainland Russia. To be honest, right now many residents, at least those in the Russian border areas, want to hear the answer to one question. Are we really winning in the special military operation?
Are we really winning, residents of the Russian border regions are asking themselves? And we have a clear answer for them. Well, of course you're winning, you simpletons. Moreover, you're literally crushing the weak and feeble Ukrops. After all, Putin has said 100 times that the special operation is going according to plan.
The special military operation is proceeding strictly on schedule, according to plan. All the assigned tasks are being successfully accomplished.
Accordingly, the wise masterminds of multi-layered schemes in the Kremlin originally planned it this way, that by the 5th year of the special military operation, residents of the Leningrad and Krasnodar regions wouldn't be able to lift their heads because of endless missile and drone attacks. And yes, dear Russia hasn't failed in any way. It's just a cunning plan, that's all.
One of Russia's largest oil ports on the Baltic, Ust-Luga, has once again come under drone attack. In recent weeks, Ust-Luga has been regularly attacked by Ukrainian drones.
On Monday night, the Ukrainian armed forces delivered a powerful strike on the Krasnodar region. The main target was the oil terminal at the local port. According to residents of Novorossiysk, drones attacked the city for several hours.
But the deeper into the woods you go, the more Russians believe their own eyes, rather than some cunning plan. After all, it's frightening even to talk about achieving any objectives of the special military operation when Ukraine is only getting stronger every year. Remember, for example, how a couple of years ago someone like Kadyrov was mumbling that Ukraine had already been defeated and now he was interested in Poland.
Ukraine is a closed matter down. I'm interested in Poland down. After Ukraine down, if the order comes down in 6 seconds down, we'll show you what you're capable of down.
A lot of time has passed since then, but instead of fighting for Poznan, Kadyrov's men are forced to whine about disrupted logistics in the Russian border regions. They say the demilitarization of Ukraine has failed so badly that the Ukrainian armed forces are only expanding the so-called kill zone.
Our adversaries have successfully obtained advanced next-generation drones, highly sophisticated upgraded drones similar to these ones. They fly farther than the previous ones. And of course, they are making every possible effort they can conceive of to systematically and entirely sever our logistics in the border area. And it appears as though they are unfortunately succeeding in their mission.
Moreover, if you believe the Russian war correspondents, the current problem for the occupiers is just the tip of the iceberg, and the real trouble will come when Ukraine and its allies are able to scale up the production of these current innovations. In short, this whole cheerleading patriotic crowd isn't having much fun. The little ones are deflating at Usain Bolt's speed.
After all, this is really just the beginning. Drone production has been set up all across the EU, so in 6 months the scale of massive attacks will surpass what is happening now by dozens of times. Anyone can guess for themselves what will be left of the oil terminals.
Meanwhile, while the military-adjacent crowd is whining and throwing fits, propagandists on federal channels are racking their brains over how to cheer up the deep people. And I have to say, the black-mouthed ones have about as much imagination as they do clean hair.
And this week we have good news from the front lines. The Russian army has completely liberated the territory of the Luhansk People's Republic.
Oh, did you see what a little victory that is? You could even have a celebratory shot of Boyarka in honor of, forgive me Lord, the liberation of the LPR. Well, why not? It's good news after all. Dirty Belova said so herself.
And this week we have good news from the front lines.
But the thing is, Russian propagandists trot out exactly the same so-called good news every single year. In case anyone forgot, back in 2022, Gauleiter Pasechnik announced control over the entire territory of the LPR. All right, Belova, let's have a look at your mug.
Today, on this third day of July is truly a momentous and great day for us all. We have successfully liberated the entire city of Lysychansk, thus finally completing the full liberation of the Republic within its recognized historical borders. I want to sincerely congratulate every single one of us on this brand new and historic day of great victory.
But of course, in reality, nothing even remotely like that happened. However, the wise curators of information policy eventually realized that the salvation of Luganda is that magical river you can enter not just twice, but even 10 times if you want. For example, here is exactly the same news about the liberation of the LNR for the year 2025.
Russian forces have completely liberated the LNR.
And here one could ask the wretched ones when they were lying, back then or now. But overall, all of this is pointless, because even if you catch the TV babbler lying 10 more times, the undiscriminating public will swallow it all without a problem. The truth is, most Russians genuinely enjoy wearing rose-colored glasses and self-deception for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Spit in their eyes and they'll say it's God's due.
And of course, the people's indiscriminate acceptance makes the job much easier for Russian officials and propagandists. In fact, the latter have gotten so lazy that they don't even bother to change their tune, even in the most critical times. Russia is being bombed, the front is at a standstill, and the capabilities of the Ukrainian armed forces are growing every day. And yet, at this very moment, Kartapolov and Solovyov are seriously discussing how, after taking Kyiv, they will line up Zelensky, Budanov, and Magyar against the wall and bring European diplomats there.
We must bring the special military operation to a victorious conclusion. Then we need to line them all up against the wall, whether in Kharkiv, on Kreshchatyk, wherever, and show, here they are, the scum standing here. These are the ones who killed. Bring the ambassadors of these so-called European states there, put them opposite and say, you raised them, you fed them, you gave them money, you kissed them in all sorts of places. Look.
Let us just remind you that exactly the same crowd 6 months ago was already planning to bring diplomats and journalists to Ukraine. Only back then, it wasn't about Kyiv, but about Kupiansk. Moreover, Solovyov himself even promised to make a Kupiansk out of other sections of the front as well.
You will all rot here. And the events in Kupiansk will inevitably be repeated on other sections of the front.
But as we know, all those tough speeches ended with the usual mess for Russia. And you really have to be completely out of your mind to publicly threaten Kyiv and Kharkiv when you've disgraced yourself in front of the whole world and couldn't even take Kupiansk.
Later, we should line them all up against the walls, be it in Kharkiv, on Kreshchatyk, or wherever you want.
But the loudmouths, it seems, genuinely don't understand that all their threats are nothing more than an own goal, and so they keep shaking their fists in a ridiculous way.
I completely understand the artillerymen who are ready to wipe Kharkiv off the face of the earth, among other places. Guys who say, let us tear them apart.
Oh, that's it, every man for himself now? Although perhaps it's worth reminding Rudolfovich that a full-scale war has been going on for 5 years now, and everyone who wants to tear...
Let us tear them apart.
They can do it quite legally. So there's no need to threaten the Kiev central office while sipping boyarka in your own neighborhood. However, sometimes it seems to us that, aside from empty threats, all these figures simply have nothing else to offer the common people. We were just laughing at the stories about Kyiv, and meanwhile, Solovyov and company are actually planning to take France as well.
These young European boys wearing their traditional short pants actually got really quite terrified and scared. They're genuinely scared because Trump finally told them the truth, that they're just freeloaders.
Time to conquer France all over again. Poor Macron probably has no idea that the troops of the First Blabbermouth Front have already set out toward Paris. Look at them, deciding to organize a new Reich over there in Gayrup.
But we understand what the response will be. In response, the creation of any kind of European military union, first of all, can only take the form of a Reich. There's no other way. And of course, it will include whatever is left of Ukraine and the Ukrainian army.
But if there's anywhere that at least an agro-Reich has already been successfully established, it's in fascist and Satanist Ukraine. At least that's what Russian propagandists firmly believe. And to make sure the serfs don't doubt our inhuman nature, they come up with creative stuff like this.
During the assault, the enemy launched a counterattack and sent out 2 armored infantry vehicles.
So it turns out there were 2 IFVs. We saw that these IFVs had a German symbol on them, a swastika, or rather, a cross.
You don't even need to listen to whatever this idiot is babbling about crosses on IFVs. because in his entire stream of consciousness there's only one important word, and that word is
swastika, swastika, swastika.
swastika. Seriously? Is that some kind of pastry? Although quite possibly Dodich is just aiming for the long vacant position of Corporal Swastika. And as for why it's vacant, we'll remind you in a moment.
They put on those hateful Nazi swastikas. But we will never permit or allow that swastika to ever be raised again in the region of Donbas.
Ah, those were the days. Kyiv, Plotva, Edka Basurin, Sanya Zakharchenko, for example. Not like these current unbearably boring idiots. But seriously, the swastika marching through the decades kind of proves that the number of idiots in the Russian world remains consistently high. And for Putin, idiots are a real treasure and his main political capital. After all, only with such an audience will threats, fakes, and cheap manipulations work. In other words, everything that the much-praised Russian world, as glorified by propaganda, has relied on for years.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And because of huge losses, Moscow has lost momentum in its offensive. It has come to a complete halt. Putin's army has broken its teeth on the front line. What steps is the dictator taking to plug the gaps at the front? Watch next.
The plan to recruit contract soldiers for the war against Ukraine in Russia is on the verge of failure. This year, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation expected to attract 409,000 people. That's about 35,000 per month. However, the actual pace of Russian mobilization is significantly lower.
Instead of the expected 1,150 contracts per day over the first 3 months of 2026, the average daily number of people signing contracts was just over 940. At the same time, it should be remembered that the number of people who signed a contract does not equal the number who actually arrived at their unit. Roughly speaking, if the trend continues, Russia may fall short by 16% or more than 65,000 people. From an article by UDF.
At the same time, losses in the Russian army at the front remain high. In March alone, Russia lost about 35,000 servicemen. The rate of replenishing personnel no longer covers the level of losses, which creates additional pressure on the recruitment system. At the same time, the armed forces of Ukraine are setting new, even higher targets for eliminating occupiers each month.
More than 35,000 occupiers have been taken off the battlefield. What does this mean? It means that the defense forces are gaining the capability to carry out the task that was set and communicated to the troops, namely, to approach the mark of 50,000 occupiers eliminated on the front line per month. If we are eliminating more of them than they are able to put into service each month, and we have eliminated more, as a result, their plans and actions become impossible to implement because there is simply no one left to actively move forward.
Due to the shortage of personnel, the Kremlin is forced to use the so-called special contingent, that is, convicted individuals under investigation or on trial. Thus, Russia is actively applying the amendments to the criminal code adopted in 2024, which allow for the conditional or complete release from punishment of defendants and convicts who have signed a contract with the Ministry of Defense, have been awarded or have been discharged from military service after being wounded.
At least 263 Russians have received suspended sentences or have been released from penal colonies on these grounds. Among them are those accused or convicted of drug trafficking, assault, theft, fraud, robbery, drunk driving, corruption, as well as at least one person convicted of rape, 13 accused of murder, and 11 accused of causing grievous bodily harm resulting in death. From an article by the publication Verstka.
At the same time, the Kremlin is becoming increasingly active through universities as well. Russian universities are essentially turning into recruitment tools. As the Moscow Times reports, the country's largest universities have been required to send at least 2% of their students to the war. And at the Russian Technological University, against the backdrop of attempts to force students into the army, the rules for expulsion have been sharply tightened. Now even a single academic debt can be grounds for expulsion from the university, whereas previously the critical threshold was 5. Previously, students on the verge of expulsion were given a choice: either lose their place at the university or sign a contract to serve in UAV units. Now, however, the Russian Federation is creating this verge of expulsion on its own. Thus, the system for recruiting people into the army is moving beyond the voluntary framework and increasingly resembles a covert mobilization, experts note.
The authorities are taking such steps only because they are very afraid to carry out a full mobilization. So accordingly, there will surely be some new things invented by the authorities here in order to postpone this moment. Well, there isn't a single good, let's say, outcome. So all of this, one way or another, turns against the authorities. Russian troops, the Russian command are making attempts and now also all sorts of meat assaults. Yes, where basically people don't matter and are just thrown almost unarmed into the line of fire. That's why, of course, they are running out of people.
Another source for replenishing personnel is foreigners. Russia plans to recruit at least 18,500 citizens of other countries this year. However, there are problems here as well. A number of countries are actively counteracting the recruitment of their citizens for the war, which narrows this channel for replenishing Russian troops. As a result, the Kremlin is literally forced to assemble its army from every possible source, from prisoners to students and migrants. Maria Zheluchenko for Freedom TV channel.
And what do you think about these events? Share your opinion in the comments, like the video, and stay up to date with the main news. Stay with us. Coming up, it gets even more interesting.